And so what I want to look at is how can we combine the classical versions of building communities with strong ties, with friendships, with the new versions of ties and communities that we've seen with online communities. Is there a way of combining those two, and what could be the effect of that? And that lovely name here might remind you of, that was a volcano that erupted. Maybe can you try to get, yes, perfect. That is a volcano that erupted last April in Iceland. As some of you might know, all the airports in Europe had to shut down. Nothing was happening anymore, and lots of people were stuck. And one of those people stuck is a friend of ours, Nathaniel. Nathaniel was at a conference in Oxford. He was on his way back. He was supposed to fly back to the U.S. He's based in San Francisco. He's a very inspiring young entrepreneur. And he calls the airline and they tell him, we're going to have a flight for you next week, maybe. And Nathaniel is, well, if I'm stuck here, if I'm stuck here, I'm not going to be the only one. If I'm stuck here, let's make something out of this. So he sits on this bus and thinks, what about if I turn this problem into an opportunity? What about if I organize a conference? What about if I bring all those people together that are stuck here in London and create a really cool event? 32 hours later, he organized TEDx Volcano. He sent an email to the TED people and was like, what about if I organize this event? 30 minutes later, he got a reply, and they said, yes, absolutely, go for it. We love the idea. In 32 hours, he found a location in central London. He found 150 people that wanted to go and attend. He found amazing speakers. He found people who donated food, who were stuffing the doors, and he spread that all over the place. He had a live stream with several hundred people watching in 32 hours. This is pretty interesting. It's like, how much can you do in 32 hours? Now, let's look a little bit more closely what's going on here. Who is Nathaniel? What's the situation? He's not from London. He's from San Francisco, or he's based in San Francisco. He has organized conferences in the past, but it's not his main field of expertise. It's not that he has a lot of people that he knows that organize conferences. Then he doesn't know many people in London. I talked to him 2 days ago and asked him, so how many people did you know in London? He said, well, I had 2-3 friends. And he had 32 hours. It's a weekend in Europe, and a weekend in Europe means everything is shut down. And he had no money. There was no budget. He couldn't just like play with money to make this happen. How is that possible? How can you do this in 32 hours? So he said something which I found very interesting, and which said, I had to tap into existing communities because I didn't have the time to build those relationships myself. Imagine 32 hours. You can't go out there and become friends with the conference organizers, people who have the locations. You have to work with relationships that are already there. And that seems to be exactly what he did. So I think if you go to the next one, the interesting thing is that's his thank you speech at TEDx Volcano. And if you look at who he's saying thank you to is TED, TEDx London, The Hub, Sandbox Network. They're all communities. And I think if you look at those communities, it's obviously all heard about TED, otherwise I guess you wouldn't be here. The next one is an organization I founded called Sandbox. The idea behind it is very simple. It's a global community of the most active, most inspiring young doers between 20 and 30. We identify young people who make stuff happen, and we bring them together all over the world. So Nathaniel was part of this. Plus, you can go to the next one. Plus, they tapped into a network of spaces of co-working spaces that had actual physical spaces called the Hub. Those 3 communities, they made this event. And I talked to Nathaniel and asked him, so what was the interaction like? And he said, well, there were a few key people involved in this. One is June Cohen. She's the head of content at TED. And she gave him the okay. She said, yes, go for it. You can use our brand. You call me on Saturday morning, and it's okay to use our brand 32 hours later, and I'll help you find amazing speakers. So I was like, how well did you know her? And he said, well, I've met her a couple of times. We shook hands, and we were maybe at a dinner together. And the other person who kind of helped them make this happen is one of my co-founders in London called Christian Bush. They had never met before. Plus all the other people who helped out, they had never met him before. So what is really interesting, I think, about this example is that those communities really helped to make something happen. Something got created, something that had never happened before, something that there wasn't a blueprint for, in very, very little time, with no money, with lots of people just jumping in and doing actual work. And I think it really talks something about the power of communities. And I think that's something I want to explore a little bit today, how that looks like. Because one thing that is very striking about this example is that most of the people that were involved in this operation were weak ties. Meaning he had never met those people before, or he knew them very little. There wasn't a close relationship with them. But what is interesting is that they were behaving as if they were strong ties. Meaning they were behaving as if they had been buddies for a long time, and they you know, Nathaniel, of course, you want to make a conference tomorrow? Sure, I'll call up the location and ask them to book a room for you. And that's something very interesting going on right now, I think. And I want to explore that a little bit more. Communities used to be very local. Communities, the word community comes from a neighborhood community. It maybe was built on expertise. You would be in the same community with all the people who would build the same thing, who would be also tailors just as you were, or it was the same ideology. Maybe it was religion, you would be in the same political party, but they would be very local, and you would build those relations over time at the same space. And I think they're really defined by strong ties. And strong ties, the beauty of strong ties is that they're very, very actionable, they're very close, they're very strong. You can ask people to help you with stuff. They tend to be very offline. You do that in many one-on-one meetings, you build those up over time, but they take a lot of energy. And you can't scale them up. Their reach is somewhat limited because you tend to have friends that have the same interests as you do. You tend to have friends that are in the same place as you do. There's just as far as you can go. But if you look at the weak ties, there's something very interesting going on. I think we've all seen in the last 10 years the enormous growth of online communities. There's online communities everywhere, and there's apparently over 100 million Facebook groups out there, all like small little communities. There's a gazillion of communities out there, and they're very different in terms of the relationships. Actually, they're much more defined by interests that people share than relationships. And they're very quick, information travels very far, but the main thing is, if someone asks you on Twitter, can you book me a room at the central location in London tomorrow? You're not going to do it. Why? Because there is no relationship there. There's no trust there. You can't turn those loose and weak ties into action. Now, if you go back and look again, so what was going on with Nathaniel? He was able to do that. He turned those weak ties into strong ties. It seems like he was using a little bit the best of both worlds. He was using the spread of weak ties. He was not from London. He was not an event organizer professionally, but he could reach into that. He could very quickly activate those kind of communities, those kind of networks. But he was able to also use the properties of friendships, of strong bondings, and he was able to use those weak ties as if they were friends. So there is something very interesting going on. I call them group ties, as a combination of both. And I see that there's a certain kind of community developing that are able to combine those two things, as the offline, the old kind of community, and the new online communities coming together. Nathaniel has really proven that. And I've been looking at communities like for a long time and been working with communities, and I call those new kind of communities curated innovation communities. In the end, they help you to make stuff happen. And I try to figure out what is the secret sauce that they're using. What is it that really makes that combination work? And I've listed kind of the 6 key figures, what I believe is really are the main driver. If you go into the first one, it's really all about trust. If you remember when he said he had to tap into existing communities because there was no time to build this relationship himself, it seems that those communities are able to build a framework that if you as a member trust the framework, you're going to trust everyone within. So even though Nathaniel did not know the people in London himself, he was part of a framework and people trusted that framework. They trusted TED. He was somehow involved with TED. They trusted Sandbox. He was involved with Sandbox, so they could trust him. And you probably know this from, I think a good example in this field is alumni communities. If you went to the same university, if someone walks into your door, there's a good chance you're going to listen to that person because you have a shared experience. You went through the same selection process to a certain degree, and there's an inside versus outside feeling. And if you feel inside, and there's other people outside, you're willing to share. You're willing to share much more, and you're willing to go further. And that seems to be something that those communities do really well. Next thing is, he posted this on his blog, and I just copied this from his blog, and I find it very meaningful. He said, "It's almost impossible to know what we're going to be doing in the future. But what's sure is that we need help doing it. The more helpful we can be for others in the meantime, the better off we'll be when we need help ourselves." What does this mean? It means that he did not plan to be stuck in London. He did not plan for the moment where he needs to organize a conference in 32 hours. But he had built those relationships over time that whenever they would come, he could kind of make them have them work. And I think there's 2 important factors here at play. One is what I called karma building. He was able to build a reputation over time. He was able to, remember when you were part of a local club, you would take over roles and you would help out with the local event, and you would maybe take over a certain volunteer position, and that would build your karma in that organization. People would take you more seriously. People would help you more because you were so involved in the local organization. It seems like those organizations, those trusted communities, are able to do that on a global level. Second of all, it seems that they're really good in creating diverse networks. Because remember, if Nathaniel would have been part of a technology entrepreneur network, which he is a technology entrepreneur right now, it wouldn't have helped him. Even though he might have had a big network, it wouldn't have helped him to organize a conference in London in 32 hours. What he needed was a very diverse group of people that at some point he was able to tap into. 3 more points. I think it's very important to remember that there's a lot of communities out there, but not all of them have a very explicit status why they exist. Many communities exist for the reason of meeting and bringing people together. What I've seen with those kind of communities, that they have a very clearly stated purpose that's about action. TED is about spreading ideas. It's very clear. That goes together. If someone comes to you and says, "I want to organize a conference tomorrow, I want to spread ideas." Yeah, sure. I mean, that's what the organization is about. And I think those communities do that really well. They state their purpose and make it very actionable. Decentralization. If TED or Sandbox would have had to organize them from their headquarters or would have to organize that from their team, nothing would have happened in 32 hours, I think. I think the power of those communities is that they allow people on the ground to become part of this. That's why Lauren is organizing this today. That's why Nathaniel was able. They were giving him the trust to be part of this community and do things bottom up. And yes, of course, technology is really important. I've stated this as my last and not as the first point because I think it's a little bit overstated, and the technology that those communities are using is still very, very basic. Let's go on. The big question in the room is, does this matter? And in what context does this matter? I think this matters a lot because we made a study and we looked within Sandbox, what are people using communities actually for? What are they using those innovation communities for? And we found that no, they're not just using it to organize last-minute conferences, but they're using it for those main categories. They're using it a lot for search. They're searching for contacts. They're searching for resources. They're searching for access, expertise, whatever it is. Innovation has a lot to do with search. You're searching for something that you didn't know where it is, what it is, how to find it, how to do it. Spread. We realized that those communities help to spread information because when you're doing something new, you have to spread it, you have to get exposure to it. Feedback. If you're doing something new, you have to figure out what do other people think about this? Am I doing the right thing? Who else should I be talking to? Inspiration. There's so much going on out there that you need to you have to get inspired, and those communities become very good in inspiration. Peer support. We believe that those communities have become one of the key value drivers is really just like-minded people who help each other out. And if you go to ask yourself, why does this matter? I would argue that those kind of innovation communities, bringing together the old kind of ties, the very strong, plus the new ones that are very loose, weak, and can grow very, very fast and go very far, that is something that every organization needs. Why? I think that we live in a world where every organization has this constant need for innovation. We have to deal constantly with new things. You're always going to be searching. You're always going to be spreading. And I also believe that every organization in the world has to learn how to deal with weak ties. Organizations are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's people in the China office that are talking to the New York office and they've never met, but they have to actually act as if they were strong ties. At the same time, people have to work together across organizations as if they knew each other for a long time. So I believe we can learn a lot from those kind of communities for any organizational forum in the world. And as Nathaniel has shown, you can do a lot in 32 hours if you know how to tap into the right communities. Thanks.